welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Turn the Page, the podcast of Syosset Library. My name is Barney Levantino, and I am welcoming back today for a second appearance on our podcast, Jode Millman. Jode, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barney.
It's good to have you. The newest book, it is the third in the Queen City crime series. The newest book is The Empty Kayak, and I just finished reading it. It was another terrific read from you, so thanks for that. Let's tell our readers a little bit about what this book is about and where it came from.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's the third, as you say, in the Queen City crime series. It can be read as a standalone. I want to, so people don't have to go back to the beginning of the series to start. But it involves actually the struggle between two women who are longtime friends. One is a detective, Ebony Jones, and the other is an attorney who's a criminal defense attorney, Jesse Martin. And the two women are brought into a collision course when someone near and dear to them is claimed to be missing in a kayaking accident on the Hudson River. And Ebony investigates, Jesse investigates, and it's really a lot of fun. And I got to learn a lot about the Hudson River, kayaking, and what it takes actually to secure and process an aquatic crime scene.
You're hitting on a lot of the little notes that I made here as I talked, and one note was I said there's a lot going on here. You have essentially a brand new DA who gets this situation dropped in her lap, and she's faced with how to process the forensics, even to determine whether a crime has happened or not. And there's so much in the book about how interesting and how difficult it is for investigators in this type of a situation where you have an incident that happened on the river and the obvious forensics are just not available to people. So that was really interesting. And I wonder, how far afield did you go to find your experts to learn a little bit how to process an aquatic crime scene?
Well, first of all, I had to learn about the Hudson River. Because even though I live, less than a mile from there and something that I see every day, I didn't really know about the geography of the river and the fact that it's 300 feet deep. And that coming out, 70 feet into the Hudson River, it's still 40 feet deep. It's a very treacherous river. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time when you go over the bridge, you look down and you see this green swirling mess. But that was the first thing. I had to understand the ecology and the geology of that river. Next, I had to figure out how, as you say, a crime scene is processed on water as opposed to on land. So I was very fortunate. There's a gal named Andrea Zafaris, and she is a well-known aquatic forensic pathologist. And she was involved in the actual underlying true crime upon which my story was inspired. And I was introduced to her through the New York State divers, because I had to find out how do you dive in the Hudson River and what are the challenges. I was referred over to Andrea, and we spent quite a time talking not only about the forensics that she needed to pursue the case, but also what was involved in her opinion in the real true crime. And so for me, it was like a fine balance. How much of the true crime do I put in as opposed to my novelist's imagination?
Well, it's tough for you, I'm sure, as the novelist. The last time you and I spoke, we were kind of wrapping up, and I said, what's on the horizon for you? And you mentioned this case, which I think happened back in 2015. It was a real case, and it got a lot of airplay. I was aware of it, and it evolved very, very quickly from, oh, what a horrible, tragic accident, to it looks like this girl murdered her fiance on the river. And, having an audience that is aware of the actual crime, you're not looking to rehash that. You need to kind of weave it in. And I'm sure that's the challenge for you as a writer, to weave that into the story that you want to tell.
Well, you know, it was interesting. The first book that I did, The Midnight Call, was a Why Done It. The second one, Hooker Avenue, was like, what's going on here? You know, we have this string of cold cases. This one was really the first true whodunit that I did. And anybody who's familiar with the crime knows ultimately who the killer was. But in my perspective, I had to create a series of suspects who possibly could have committed this crime. Right. So that was the real challenge for me, creating this, you know, kind of rainbow of people who possibly could have committed this crime in a realistic fashion. So that was really fun and challenging for me.
And it was fun to read. You did it well. There were a lot of moments where, even though I knew in reality how things turned out, I wasn't quite sure where you were going to go, which makes it more interesting for a reader. I mean, there were a lot of potential suspects here, and they all had legitimate reasons for working on that.
Exactly. You know, money, sex, you know, revenge, they're all there. I mean,
all the fun things.
Yes, exactly.
The book it's a true crime book, but fundamentally taking the true crime element out of it, and you touched on it at the beginning, it's really a book about relationships between this small core of people who kind of recur in your books. In particular, Ebony, who is dealing with, she's the detective for our readers, she's dealing with her relationship with Jesse, who they grew up as best friends since childhood. And now they often find themselves kind of at loggerheads, one as a detective, the other as a defense attorney. So there's that relationship which is being explored in the book. There's Ebony's relationship with her detective partner, which is kind of going in a different direction. And there's a little bit of uneasiness I sense in her as to how that ultimately may turn out for the good for both of them.
Right.
And again, not a spoiler alert, but there's a lot going on in those relationships. And I think reading it, you almost feel sympathy for Ebony in terms of Jesse's often reaction. I find Jesse's reaction to what's going on and her relationship with Ebony in a lot of ways unfair to Ebony. I mean, she's in a difficult position, and Jesse doesn't make it easy for her.
Well, you know, what's interesting about their relationship is that it's been good up to a very recent point, because before Jesse was a corporate law attorney, so they never had any issues. It's just after Jesse's life had to be rehabilitated because she was considered a suspect in a murder crime that was pitted against Ebony, that their relationship really started to circle the drain. So it's very new. I mean, Ebony feels like she's almost like losing a sister in this situation. But the thing about Ebony is that she really is riddled with insecurities. She measures herself against Jesse, who's an attorney, because Ebony, as we find out, could have been an attorney, but she decided to pursue, criminal procedure and law enforcement as opposed to becoming an attorney. She measures herself against her sister, who is a brilliant physician. She measures herself to some degree against her partner, because she is a female in a male-dominated profession. So we have a gal who, as brilliant and as creative and as thinking outside the box and road as she is, she really doesn't really believe in herself as much as she should have. And I think that's part of her arc in this story, that by the end of the book, I hope that that's where she's headed in that relationship with herself as well as her relationship with Jesse.
That's interesting, because I didn't get that sense from her. I see her as being tougher than that. But I guess I got to go back and reread, because I got a different sense. And maybe I'm being unfair to Jesse, because I kind of put more of the difficulty between them on Jesse's She's a smart woman, but sometimes she comes across as a little bit, I don't want to say naive, but in terms of what she expects from Ebony in the course of her investigations, or how Jesse expects the real world to respond to things. There's a significant bit of information with Jesse withholds during the course of the investigation, and it somewhat impedes the investigation. And while Jesse is on her own mission to solve things, it struck me as really counterproductive to her. And like I said, I'm saying naive, but I can't put my finger on why, that bothered me.
Well, Jessie is walking a fine line. She doesn't really, in this situation, she doesn't know she doesn't want to overreact to her personal issues that are involved in this particular disappearance. But again, she's concerned about her role as an attorney. And she's not really sure. She's walking a very fine line. And, she really wishes that Ebony would just let her be to some degree. Just let me do what I've got to do. Let me deal with it. And when I'm ready, I'll come to you with, everything in a basket tied up in a neat bow for you. Mm-hmm. But until that time, I just need you to be hands off.
In Jesse's defense further, as I'm thinking about the victim here is also her ex, who's also the father of her child. Right. So you also have this huge maternal streak going through her, and that's kind of driving a lot of it as well. Is what am I going to do, and how do I protect my daughter going forward? So I'll take back some of my criticism of Jesse. I kind of thinking about it from that perspective.
Also you have to realize that Jessie finds herself in a situation where she's suddenly bombarded with information about Kyle, her ex. Mm-hmm. And she feels she doesn't even know this guy that she was living with for 6 years. Exactly. That she's just uncovering all of these little secrets that he withheld from her. And all of a sudden she really has to question, she doesn't question her sanity, but she questions, did I ever really know this guy? Mm-hmm. And this guy was the father of my kid. And how am I supposed to react to that?
That's fair. You're right.
There you go.
I wasn't being fair.
Yeah. Don't be so tough on Jessie. She's had a rough time in these past 3 months.
Yes, indeed. There's also, the situation. Let's go back to the DA, who's brand new, and she's been in the position for just a couple of months, and she kind of gets this dropped into her lap, as I said, and the way she pursues it is also kind of interesting, because she's kind of going on two different tracks at the same time, thinking that let me at least lay the groundwork in case there's been a crime committed, versus just it doesn't have anything to do with it. It's a death on the river that doesn't have anything to do with us. So there's that element, and her relationship with her predecessor, who is now Jesse's live-in beau.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on. A lot of people involved with one another in these stories, and it's a close-knit group. So you practiced and you lived in that area for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And it's a fairly small community compared to other cities. So how often do you find people wondering, okay, which character is that? And who is that I knew? And do you have people wondering like where your people come from?
All the time. In fact, I was recently on a radio show here, and a friend of mine says, well, when I read your books, I know who you're identifying and who's really the person behind the veil. And honestly, all of these characters are figments of my imagination. So it's really kind of interesting. And what's also is interesting, that people come up to me and they say, yeah, I know this crime, or I knew this person who was affiliated with this crime. Mm-hmm. So I really think on a local level, these stories really strike a chord, as well as across the country. I get contacted by people, I used to live in Poughkeepsie, or I knew someone that had a relationship to this crime. So people really take a vested interest in the stories and the characters.
I guess that's natural when your setting is in, and not to call Poughkeepsie a small town, but relative to other cities, it's a relatively small city and people know each other. And I guess it's going to be natural for residents and your readers in the area to think about, this happened right close to home, and she lives right close to home. So somebody must be behind this character. And I'm sure subconsciously there are probably people that you worked with and you knew that might have worked their way into some of these characters as well.
Well, what's also interesting is that I take information from real people like Andrea Seferis, this gal who's the forensic aquatic pathologist. I mean, was one of my characters, fashioned after her? I would have to say more the information she gave me than the person herself, because I never met. I mean, we just did a Zoom kind of thing. I never met her firsthand. But, I think you're right that, and that's part of the fun of it, that people like to identify,
Sure.
a character with a person. I mean, it's funny, after I wrote the first book, people came up to me and they said, well, which pregnancy are you talking about? Your first, when you were pregnant with the first kid or the second kid? And we know that you're Jesse. No, I'm not Jesse. Maybe Jesse has some of my spunk. I would hope so. But certainly she's not anyone, I don't fit into her skin.
I'm going to go back to the actual event that happened,
Sure.
The underlying crime. What was the community's reaction when it all kind of played out and it turned out the way that it did, going from tragic accident on the river to a murder? How did people make that 180-degree change?
Well, one thing that wasn't in the book, and that people know about if they're familiar with the true crime, is that my association with it started at a radio station where I used to work. And there was a guy there named Mike Colvin, who my husband happened to hire, who was a DJ there. He lived with this gal named Angelica Grasswald for many years. Mm-hmm. They broke up, and she went on to become engaged to Vincent Viafor, who was ultimately the victim in the true life case. Mm-hmm. So I think because this DJ was well known in the community and had a direct tie to the crime, it was something that got a lot more attention than if these people were unrelated to this small community. Right. That's here in Dutchess County. The actual crime occurred down in Orange County, which is Newburgh. And so this case made national news, international news. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was on 2020 and Dateline. I mean, it really captured the imagination of the entire country and the world, and especially locally. I mean, people were on pins and needles, and they were especially on pins and needles when ultimately the killer got off.
Yeah.
She really did. She served, I think it was 27 months for manslaughter. She was never admitted committing the crime when all of the evidence indicated she had committed the crime. But the problem was the district attorney couldn't prove it because everything was out in the water. Mm-hmm. There was no real hard evidence against her. There were so many intervening factors and so much stupidity on the part of the victim and this woman that really was what got her off the murder charges anyway.
Wow. It was really an amazing story even when it was happening. And you as a writer, when you take a true event like that and you try to weave it into your own particular narrative, I mean, is that more difficult for you than creating something out of whole cloth and just starting from scratch?
Well, maybe because I'm an attorney and I've done cases over the years, and I know I have a point A and a point Z, that eventually the case is going to end and there's an arc to my cases. For me, it's very similar when I am fictionalizing or seeking inspiration from these true crime cases. I like to be organized. I like to know where I'm going, but at the same time, it's a bit of a cage. because I can't change. Ultimately, I really can't change who was the killer. I mean, I'm tied in. I mean, I could because it's fiction, but I like to be true and accurate, when I tell my stories. To me, that's the fun of it, though, being able to take these local crimes and then insert my characters in those particular stories. How would Jesse react? How would Ebony react? How would Cindy and Tarico, who's the district attorney, how would all these people react if they were faced with this particular type of crime?
And it makes for a really terrific story. The characters are wonderful. I enjoyed them the last time, and I got to know them a little bit more this time. And I want to get to know them a little more down the road as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I asked you this question last time, and it led to the empty kayak. So what are you working on now?
Well, I've been writing really very religiously for, I would have to say, the past 3 years. So I promised myself I'm taking the summer off.
Okay.
And I'm going to start to research over the summer, but I'm not going to start to write to the fall. So right now I'm in the research phase. I'm looking through archives to determine what might be the next crime that, will appear on the pages.
You're a busy lady too. Are you still doing writing seminars, the Writers Law School?
Yes, I am. I'm doing the Writers Law School, and I lecture at, writing conferences, libraries all over the country. And
the Writers Law School is probably something that our readers are not familiar with, our listeners here at the podcast. Tell us a little bit about that, how it works, and what your mission is with that.
Well, it's about a 45-minute presentation that I do. It's virtual. I've done some in person, but it's mostly virtual. And it really educates writers as to what their basic legal rights are. What is a copyright? What is a trademark? How do you form your own business? What are some of the basic publishing caveats that I should be aware of in a publishing contract? All those things that really writers have a tendency to think about themselves as writers and not business people. So I try to nudge them along to make them broaden, the way that they view themselves to protect their legal rights. So, and it's interesting because it's always changing, because the law is always changing, which is really nice, and it prevents me from being bored. And it also, now with this whole AI revolution, it's also opened up the doors for me to do a program on that. So I'm going to work on that this summer too, because writers really need to know what's going on with, with artificial intelligence.
Sure. You're also doing a podcast up there as well, right?
Yeah, we have the longest running performance venue in the country. It's called the 1869 Bardavon Opera House. And I've been interviewing over the past couple of years various acts or people that are affiliated with the Opera House, kind of as an oral history of the Opera House, but also to introduce people to the people behind the scenes. It's such a wonderful venue that we have. That's sort of been on a hiatus the past year because I've been so busy writing, but hopefully in the fall I'll get ramped up with that as well.
That venue's been there that long?
1869. I mean, people like Mark Twain and the Barrymores and Frank Sinatra. I mean, Aretha Franklin, Tony Bennett, you name it, Santana. They've all been there. It's incredible.
Wow. I did not know that.
It's incredible. And it's beautiful. It's small. It's about 1,000 seats. I mean, you're literally sitting in the lap of these artists when you go see them there. We have Patti LuPone coming up pretty soon too, which is.
We have to make it a point to get up there.
Oh, it's amazing. You'll enjoy it.
I definitely will. I enjoyed the book. And as always, it's fun talking to you. It's a pleasure. And thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to look forward to the next chapter in the Queen City's crime novel and see what Jesse and Ebony are going to be up to down the road.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.